After years of tough talk and tariff volleys, Washington is preparing to roll back key duties, a quiet retreat that collides with record price increases, broken supply chains, and eroding trust abroad. Allies hedged, rivals adapted, and costs at home piled up. If the trade war ends here, what exactly did it deliver, and who paid the bill? Quick pulse check. Keep tariffs, cut them, or replace them. What's your move and why? Comment below. The situation is changing rapidly. It seems the U.S. tariff war with the world is nearing an end, and Washington is already forced to reckon with heavy losses. After years of tough rhetoric, promises to break China, and pressure on allies to buy American, the White House is now retreating and preparing to cancel tariffs. According to sources close to the administration, new lists are being drawn up that include not only Chinese goods, but also reductions on products from India, Brazil, and several Asian countries. In Congress, the mood is that America is counting its losses and trying to save face after record price increases, broken supply chains, and a sharp decline in allied trust. The blow to America's international image has been especially painful. India, which Trump tried to keep in his orbit, has in the past 2 years effectively shifted under China, signing dozens of agreements in high technology and defense industries. Brazil has reoriented exports to BRICS markets and now openly says cooperation with Beijing is more profitable and stable than with Washington. Even Europe, which long followed in the wake of American policy, has grown tired of unpredictability and begun restructuring production chains. As a result, the United States finds itself more isolated. Instead of dictating the rules of global trade, it is watching a new architecture of the global economy form around China and BRICS. Analysts at the Peterson Institute note that the tariff war not only failed to weaken China, but actually accelerated diversification. Beijing began investing in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, creating new markets and reducing dependence on American consumers. The tariffs also pushed China to accelerate import substitution. Many industries once vulnerable are now covered by domestic production. In closed reports for the White House, it is stated outright that the tariff war made China stronger than before it began. And this is Washington's biggest strategic failure in decades. At home, the blow was even more painful. American farmers were the first victims of the confrontation when Beijing responded with restrictions and stopped buying American soybeans and grain. Tens of thousands of farms in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and other states were pushed to the brink of bankruptcy. Compensation programs could not cover the real losses, and many farms were forced to close. Industry fared no better. The promised jobs never returned. Factories did not reopen, and companies instead began rapidly moving production to Mexico, Vietnam, and even Africa to bypass tariffs. Large corporations found workarounds, supplying goods through third countries, which rendered tariffs meaningless while increasing costs for American consumers. Research from the Penn-Wharton budget model shows that in the long term, tariffs could reduce U.S. GDP by 6% and cut wages by 5%, while data from Yale's Budget Lab confirm that by the end of 2025, employment will be 500,000 jobs below the projected level. For the White House, this is a political disaster since the slogan of bringing jobs back was the foundation of the entire campaign. Now that slogan is a symbol of unfulfilled promises and disappointment. Within the Republican Party, a split is brewing. Some conservatives demand a hard line and new levers of pressure. But more politicians admit the tariff war has driven the country into a dead end. Economists say bluntly, the U.S. has embarked on a path of self-destructive policy that simultaneously undermines its own industrial sector and weakens its position on the international stage. Allies are increasingly choosing China as a more reliable partner, while developing countries see Washington not as a leader, but as a source of instability. China, meanwhile, is using every U.S. mistake to its advantage, showing that the era of American unipolarity has come to an end. It is strengthening military cooperation with Russia, developing strategic projects in Africa, investing in the Middle East, and creating new trade corridors through the Belt and Road Initiative. For many countries, this is an alternative that seems more attractive than the chaotic and unpredictable policy of the White House. Against this backdrop, criticism is emerging in the American media. The New York Times writes about a lost decade for the American economy. The Wall Street Journal reports that business has lost trust in trade policy. And the Financial Times cites Western analysts who openly state that the U.S. has lost the war it started itself. At home, pressure from trade unions is growing. Workers in metallurgy and the automotive industry openly state that tariffs not only failed to help, but also made goods more expensive, which reduced consumer demand and led to layoffs. The political opposition uses this as its main argument. The tariff war has become a symbol of failure, and the White House has proved unable to fulfill its own promises. The picture is completed by the polls. According to the latest surveys, confidence in the administration's economic policy has fallen to a record low, and the failure of the tariff strategy is named as the main factor. The White House has essentially found itself in a situation where any decision leads to losses. Continuing the tariff war threatens the final collapse of the economy, while ending it would be an open admission of defeat. And it is precisely this scenario that Washington is moving toward. Preparations for lifting tariffs are underway, and in the coming months, the U.S. will be forced to publicly announce a revision of its entire trade strategy. The outcome is clear. The tariff war ended not in victory but in capitulation, with America emerging weakened with a destroyed reputation, lost jobs, and a forfeited role as global leader. However, the consequences turn out to be deeper than they appear at first glance. Many experts warn that the failure of the tariff war could trigger avalanche-like processes within the American system. Already today, public debt has reached historic highs. The combination of high inflation and declining consumer purchasing power is creating a dangerous mix that threatens social stability. Millions of Americans are forced to cut back on food and housing, which stands in stark contrast to images of massive military spending and Washington's attempts to intervene in every global conflict. The United States finds itself in a position where foreign policy consumes resources while the domestic economy collapses under the weight of its own mistakes. And the most alarming thing for the White House is that allies see this weakness and are beginning to act according to the new realities. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are discussing oil settlements in yuan. Africa is increasingly welcoming Chinese investments, and Latin America is forming new trade blocs without American participation. For the global economy, this is a turning point. Where once the American market was considered the main center of profit, more countries are ready to build a parallel system in which Washington plays only a secondary role. And it is the tariff war, conceived as a tool of demonstrating strength, that became the catalyst for these processes. American political scientists admit that the world is entering an era in which the U.S. can no longer unilaterally dictate the rules. This means the White House faces a choice. Either acknowledge the new realities and attempt to integrate into the emerging multipolar order, or continue clinging to its lost status, risking the final loss of what influence remains. But whichever option is chosen, one thing is clear. The tariff war, instead of becoming a symbol of American power, has gone down in history as its greatest geopolitical failure. Tell me where you see the first real effects, in prices, paychecks, or policy, and how this should be fixed in a durable, credible way now.